remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch on your microphone off when you are not speaking, and to turn it on when you do want to speak, unlike myself at the beginning. And just to introduce two officers that we've got with us this evening: Darryl Birch to my left, Services Manager for Neighbourhoods, and Ed Palmer, sat on the end, Communications and Customer Services Manager. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda for apologies for absence. Do we have any at all, please?
We don't have any apologies for absence.
Right, thank you very much. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Item 3, the minutes of the meeting on the 21st July 2022. Do you have any comments or any question about those? Could I have a show of hands for me to sign those, please? Thank you very much. Just for item 4, do we have any actions from previous meetings that are outstanding?
No, thank you, Chair. There's no actions from the last Community Scrutiny Group meeting in July, so there's no further actions to take forward at the moment. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Next item is the Council's external communication strategy, and I'll pass over to Ed for a brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, good evening, councillors. Just a thank you, first of all, to the Scrutiny Group for looking at this evening. This is the first time in recent years we've looked at both reports this evening, internal communication strategy and the customer access strategy. It's a real opportunity for myself and on behalf of the team, who obviously look at these parts of the services that we provide as a council. We do routine day in, day out. We're so close to it sometimes. It's very, very good to get these perspectives. So I think this will be a really valuable exercise this evening, or I hope it will be. And I look forward to your feedback and where the discussion goes. Just want to start off, if we can, with a bit of context, just to say where we're at. And this is probably valid for both strategies this evening, but certainly for this first report. We very much view these as holding strategies. The council develops 5-year, 10-year strategies, and this is a 3-year one. And it's deliberately so that the trends can be further adapted in line with resident and customer behaviour and expectation. This is obviously significantly down to COVID and what's happened in recent years, but also it's just the nature of change as well, particularly in communications and even customer services. It changes so rapidly. So we're probably in a position where we'll be coming back in 3 years' time, and again, it might be a 3-year strategy, not a 5, because we're having to adapt, we're having to change. The financial landscape is so changeable itself as well, that we need to have this regularity of looking at strategies in depth so regularly. So this is just a bit of context for you. And what will be really key as well is that among the channels through which residents obviously feed back to us as much as day to day on all of our channels, but also that resident survey in 2025, it'll take place before these next strategies are devised, and they'll play a really, really key part in shaping them going forward. But it's only one part of it, but it's a really, really key part that before you see this again in 2025, it'll be where it's at. So just to give you a very quick strategy overview of, first of all, in the communications one. Sorry, excuse me. So externally then, communication, as you'll have seen from the report, it needs to be timely, engaging, clear, accurate. We utilise a variety of channels and mediums to make sure residents are as informed as much as possible. That in itself obviously is a big challenge. Digitally, of course, you've got an ever-growing audience and an audience that's used to engaging with digital content, but also there's a huge, a large percentage of residents who don't engage with us for whatever reason. They may be digitally active and choose not to engage with us. There also is obviously a percentage of residents who aren't digitally engaged at all. So externally, this is one of the key things to having a relationship with our residents and communities, is delivering a vision with our priorities and activities and what we do with communications to ensure that those key messages and our services reach the needs of those audiences. Internally, then, we've brought in an internal strategy from this point on, because COVID, amongst other reasons, has meant that it's been ever more important to communicate and reach out to our internal stakeholders ever more. The methods, the ways in which we engage with each internal stakeholder, we have to continue to review them, look if they're successful, look if they're effective. And that's why we brought this internal part of the strategy in now, to ensure that those yourselves, such as councillors, our staff, other internal stakeholders, are kept up to speed as much as possible. The action plan, then, just to have a look and just to really as an overview from everything that you've got in front of you this evening. Education on council services will be ever more important, we think, for the lifetime of this strategy, and the ways in which and the manner in which we do it will be really, really important. Social media development, whether that's new channels, whether that's adapting to the trends of new channels, the advocacy and behavioural change campaigns, really, really important. And we anticipate that we'll invest time into this, balanced with the other points here. Email subscription service that we provide, and if anybody here is subscribed to our email subscription service, I'd certainly recommend it. If you're not, that's a Sunday morning update that currently goes out to around about 4,000 people, a channel that we're very, very committed to extending to try and reach as many people as possible in such a convenient way. That's an example of where we need to progress this strategy and align it with that non-digital engagement. And when we talk about that, we talk about, for example, Rushcliffe Reports. 3 times a year, that magazine goes out to every household in the borough. And it's very, very keen that we have that balance for a volume of people who, as we said before, are not digitally engaged. Maybe the only correspondence they'll get from us is around maybe a service for council tax, maybe for bin collections, but that's the only other way that they get a direct correspondence from us. We'll look at doing a skills audit in the team, who reads what survey. That's really, really keen to ensure that the communications that we do are reaching the desired audience and having the desired effect. And then we'll also look at external partner development. Exceptionally important that we look at who we can work with in terms of our partners to relay messages. Only recently, we've had a renewed partnership with our health colleagues, not just on the back of COVID-19, but for other reasons as well. And it's important that we keep developing those. We'll have an annual comms planner. As much as there is obviously an outline of what we do week to week, month to month, we want to formalise that a lot more. And this will assist the development of a new website that we anticipate will launch at some point next year. More quickly onto the internal side of things and the action plan, as you can see, we've got surveys, annual assessment of content, ways to engage, increase video interactive animation content. As you might imagine, the ways in which we've got to continue to engage and ensure that the content that is sent out there captures the imagination, is fresh, is understandable, is relatable, and that's a really, really key part of what we need to do for our internal stakeholders. Internally, in board of reflecting, recognising achievement there, that's key for staff. It's an incredible way of which we get a lot of very good feedback on ensuring that staff are engaged in that way, and not just staff as well. Of course, when councillors do things in the community, in ways in which we can look and engage and showcase their work, and the hard ways in which they make all the efforts, the hours they go to. And this is what the strategy is trying to achieve, amongst other things, is to ensure that those internal stakeholders get that recognition. Finally, which is really, really key, ongoing engagement and listening. We'll see that later again in terms of a key theme of the customer access strategy, but it's listening and engaging every single day to what our internal groups and external groups want to do. So, Chair, I think that's hopefully an overview to start. If there's anything you'd like to start with, please let me know.
Thank you too much. Open it up to the floor for councillors. To Councillor Jeff.
Having a yearly conference for older pupils, say 16 plus years, similar to the one we had yesterday, because I think it's quite important that teenagers are able to come here and our officers are able to answer their questions, make presentations and so on. I don't think this is something which we ourselves should be doing, or teachers, because you can run into hot water there, you know. And I'm thinking of it being not political in any way. And if we could have them here once a year, I think it would be really very, very good. Because otherwise, where are they going to find out what's going on? You see, and in a couple of years after that, they'll be perhaps earning and they'll want to know where there's money is going, where it's being spent. And we should prepare them for that before they actually leave and take up jobs of work. Thank you.
Councillor James, you had your hand up.
A number of points have been made, Councillor Chairman. I'd echo what Councillor Jeffries has just said. In fact, I'd probably widen it to people doing Duke of Edinburgh Award and their parents, because they are often very engaged young people, even below 16. And I think that's a suggestion well worth pursuing, engaging young people. As to the document, I think I was looking for a slightly higher profile to the provision of advice and information about benefits, personal finance, energy saving, warnings of scams. That seemed to me to be what a lot of people are more bothered about, particularly at the moment. Personally, I think, although the council is very good at complimenting itself and echoing compliments, I don't think there's any harm if there are people who are complaining and dissatisfied that is equally reflected, because people otherwise think, well, this isn't real. There's got to be somebody who's not happy. I'm presuming that the videos and guides for council services are about access to the services as well as the nature of them. But my last point really is about minorities who are less likely to be the ones who are engaged. So it's inevitable that the council's communications tend to be to adults, white, English-speaking residents, but not everybody falls into that category. So there is an issue about how responsive is it to think about people who are deaf or blind, or in other words, or disabled, and how's that reflected in the information about the council services? And is the option of interpretation of some of these items into Chinese, Arabic, maybe Urdu, something that is flagged up? Because there are quite a number of people who still struggle with English, but their first language is otherwise. So those are my 3 points. Thank you, Chair.
Ed, did you want to go on?
Thank you for those. Yeah, just to talk about engagement with younger generation. There's elements of that within the action plan, talking about working with partners more. So our friends at Young, for example, a prime example of maybe this is what the strategy is looking at to engage further with them and do more with them. We do, for example, a very successful education first engagement into the election process with schools once a year. And that is an example of, it's very successful, it's non-political, it gives them that real sense of how they can relate to something that they're going to be doing in a few years' time and voting in a real election. I think that's definitely something we can build on. It's a case that we'll probably need to look at it council-wide rather than just being a communications function, but certainly, yeah, we can look at building on what we already do. I think that's I think that's something we can definitely take away and explore, and see how we can shape that. Absolutely. Going on to then just the points on the benefits, energy saving, absolutely valid points, particularly now. I think the reason that the strategy doesn't go into, I mean, this was first drafted roughly 3 months ago, and whilst energy saving benefits was obviously on the horizon, then it deliberately doesn't hone in on issues that maybe is specific for now because it's a 3-year strategy. And I'm sure some of those issues will still very much be valid in that time frame, but it's deliberately not non-specific. So it talks, when you talk about content or references to behaviours, etc., it's dealing with issues now. I mean, for example, forthcoming Rushcliffe reports will have very significant look at cost of living, signposts to where residents can access support. So I hope, so, as much as some of the strategy doesn't go into specifics as such, the very timely content will still be there month after month. So apologies if that's not necessarily clear. You can take the point absolutely about complaints, dissatisfaction. The reason that you may not see as much of it, for example, some of the channels is because in a very busy 2022, people only got a certain amount of time to engage and keep key information. And whilst we want to be absolutely fair and transparent, we want to put information out there that's helpful. And I think there's obviously ways in which you can access all of the information about complaints and the nature of them and how the council has dealt with them in other channels. So I hope that it is a case that we can answer those in that manner, rather than putting them all out on public channels. It's only really from just trying to be constructive as a communications team to put information out there that people find useful and can engage with. Finally, just a point about minorities. Absolutely, we already provide, it's the inside cover of Rushcliffe reports, that we can provide a CD for those who wish to have that audible version of Rushcliffe reports. There's no reason why we can't extend it to if you wish to receive this magazine in a certain language or in a certain format. Again, we can look at that and we can make that change pretty quickly.
If you've got a magazine in English and at the end it says, if you want this interpreted in Chinese, you're not going to get that far.
One of the reasons that with every or just about every video now that you might see on a social media channel, for example, is subtitled, and we'll look at going forward ways in which that you can amend those subtitles to a language of your choice. So again, that's not an option that's in place at the moment, but it's in the lifetime of this strategy. I hope that will be an option that will be widespread across social media.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The other thing I was just going to remind the group, we will be reviewing the work programme at the end of the meeting. 19th of January, this group will actually be looking at a report, and we've obviously not got the report or the makeup of it yet, but the potential establishment of a youth council. So that will be on the agenda for the January scrutiny group meeting, and hopefully there may be some link there about how we further engage with the Rushcliffe youth.
There's so much religious turmoil in the world now. People killing one another, at war with one another, and so on. And I wonder, I asked if perhaps we could have a conference once a year. Might it not be a good idea, perhaps once a year, to have representatives of all of so many religions to come in? Because it seems to me that people can cause so much offence over just an innocent remark, and people are so sensitive now. And perhaps we could look at that, because we need to have all the religions on our side. And I'm sure that not all the religions view what we're doing in the same way. So if you could have them all together, perhaps that might help.
Councillor Walker,
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ed, for the report. So I think some of the context is relevant here, which, if I remember correctly, we had some concern over some relatively poor scores in the last survey. Is this on? Sorry. Were around our residents' feelings that their views weren't taken into account as much as they can, and that they felt unable to influence the decisions. And I wonder, when I've read through this, action plan or the strategy got at those 2 points strongly enough, I suppose. Through a lot of the different aspects, I kind of keep coming back to questions around balance. So there's really an awful lot of over communication, and so there's kind of the balance there. I agree with Councillor Jones, the balance between look at us, aren't we great, and having broad enough shoulders to demonstrate there are areas in which we know that we can improve. I think, again, on that balance, which goes back to the first point about context, I wonder, particularly in relation to our kind of social media content, whether the balance is right between showing and telling versus asking. And I'm not sure that the action plan necessarily kind of goes to that enough. Because really that is the way to get that engagement, right? Ask the question, and we don't know kind of necessarily what response that we'd get. As a side of interest, I thought I'd do a little bit of research in terms of engagement on the social medias. I had a quick look at Facebook, and there's one post that recent post which hugely outperformed all of it. Does anybody know what it was?
I hazard a guess.
Yes.
Our biggest reaching post this year was the Nottingham Forest planning.
Perhaps I was looking at a shorter
maybe
period,
a shorter time frame.
A shorter time frame. It was help find this dog. Yeah, massively. In terms of shares, hugely disproportionately engaged with. Well, and last point, perhaps maybe later we will get into the weeds of some of the action points. Is I wonder if we're brave enough, if we're looking at more video contact, if we're brave enough to take on maybe some of the things which might be in the too difficult box. I was thinking about, the kinds of things that there's some really common themes that residents, when you talk to wherever, in the shop or in the pub or on the street, that keep coming back to, that I wonder whether we could take on a bit more strongly. I'm thinking about, issues around what the county council does and what the borough council do. Why roadworks are timed in the way that they are. I realise that's a county council issue, but these are some of the things that we get a lot, and I'm not sure we communicate them enough. Why we're not collecting glass and food. We've talked about that at this committee, and there are some, we'll have a different view about that, but there are some, the council has a position around that, based on I would see there's a rational argument to put forward, but we don't necessarily always be prepared to go out and put that message out there. Perhaps I've said enough already, so I'll leave it there.
Thanks, loads of really, really valid points. Very much sure, I think, as the balance about listening and being ensuring that balance is correct, and probably something that isn't outlined as part of this is very much on engagement and listening. who does a sort of you said we did reaction. So something that's really, really key, and that I think you're absolutely right, possibly isn't focused on enough, is to highlight, give us your views, and we'll try and translate those into our services. And possibly, whilst we obviously publicise out their consultations as and when they come along, we probably need to showcase more of their results, a lot more existing consultation at the moment on a PSPO. We can have a look at that as a real example of saying, this is what you've told us, and this is a result, is what you've done. It's a tricky balance to get right on every single subject. We won't necessarily look at every single consultation and do that, but certainly for the ones that affect far more residents, that affect far more volume of residents, and all those that are relatable, of interest, we can certainly look at ways in which we can communicate that better. Absolutely take that on board. Take your point as well on about the over communication. We're in an era where you saw it very much during COVID-19, the saturation of messaging. It is phenomenal, and that is a real key part of what we need to get right, is the balance. We even look at the volume of, for example, the number of social media posts that might go on Ruskin Borough Council channels on any given day. There is only so much information our residents can consume, and this is where we're trying to hone in on with the strategy to say, right, let's prioritise what we need. Understand as well in terms of the broad shoulders, tackling the issues that matter. I think it's mentioned in the action plan about the Environment Bill, and when it does come along, real key opportunity to tackle one of those key things. We know we've come onto it in terms of curbside collections. We know it's been there for years. One of the reasons that when we do content around recycling, we want to use content that is positive. We've taken on board the feedback for many years in terms of that sort of issue. It's not a case that we want to not address it, but again, when we do engage, when we do put updates out there, we want to try and get feedback about new topics, new, other insights that we haven't already got. So it might be a case that we don't, as you say, have broad shoulders and address items as regularly as we might do, because we've already got that feedback. And for example, that classic one, we're waiting for that Environment Bill to come along, and that might sound an excuse in the short term, but it is a case of we've put enough content out of there over a number of years. We've got the same feedback. We know what residents think. It's a case now of waiting for us to be able to change that. So it's a case of getting that content right, so it's engaging. One thing that's important as a council, I think, is that you are not giving an opportunity to miseducate. And sometimes as well, it's a case that if you put a topic out there that you know that you don't necessarily need to address at a certain time, it can actually end up causing misinformation to other residents. So it's really key that we get the balance right. But I take your point completely. It is about that balance, and being more transparent at times.
Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's loads of good stuff in it. I think the first thing to say is thank you for bringing this back on, the idea of a 3-year rather than a 5-year, because potentially, if it was still 5-year, then whoever gets elected May next year might not even see the strategy. It might be the people who are elected after that who would see it next time round. So I think it's important that members get the opportunity to look at and review this within that sort of electoral cycle. I was quite surprised that it's only 4,000 people signed up to the email so far. I would have thought it would be more than that. I know not everybody likes the idea of getting their emails, their inboxes bombarded by emails, but there's a useful way of doing it. I'm guessing that you'll be able to tell me that we get stats back on who opens it, who just deletes it, and all that kind of thing, much like you do with the website as well, because that'll sort of drive, I guess, how we make modifications and what we find that people want to look at and what they find useful. On the social media side of it, I totally appreciate that's a fast-moving market. I think Elon Musk has just bought Twitter, or he's been told he has to buy Twitter or something like that. I'm not quite sure it's going to end up in the courts. but yeah, there's the number of people during COVID who sort of dived onto WhatsApp groups for their local streets, for their local communities. That was absolutely huge. Some of those groups still are there, some are not. I don't know how we might integrate that. But then there's also ones like Signal and Telegram as well. And if you get people, Councillor Jones said about people moving, people wanting to look at other languages, people who've moved into the community, perhaps from Ukraine, places like that, are not terribly engaged, as I understand it, with WhatsApp. They tend to use, I think it's Telegram, because that's more popular in other countries, and therefore might need to look at which social media platforms we use for different messaging. I don't know. There is also what I've encountered is that the things that seem to come up most often are things like what day is bins. The number of times you see that, is the co-op still open, and what time is the co-op? And people just put that on local Facebook groups all the time, and I'm seeing fellow councillors smiling. I think they know that, but really I would absolutely endorse the idea about sort of being concise. There's the idea of be brilliant, be beautiful, be concise, and I think if communications are like that, then they'll be more impactful and be able to reach out to our residents more. We know that different people use different platforms across different age groups, and I think we'll have to sort of keep the platforms under review, as I said. But I also think that we have to be very sharp about how we message people, because we are very, very couched in local government speak as officers and members, but most people out there aren't. I think we have to look very carefully at, with our written content, how we express ourselves and what we call our services, and what we call our services internally, and how that translates to outside there. If someone is, this is the lot to do with communities, and that's to do with something else, what does that mean? Is that obvious to our residents? Because I think a lot of the terminology that we use internally is not at all obvious to our residents.
Thanks, Councillor Andrew. Yeah, absolutely. The first point just about the email subscription. Yeah, we've got a campaign to push that out. I think it's over both strategies, but certainly we'll look at ways in which to hugely increase that number of people who email subscription, or at least give them the opportunity to join it. So that's definitely on the agenda. Other channels as well, talking about engaging, the Ukraine example, great example. That's something that I think you really talk about what was the playing surface look like in 3 years' time. It could be that we have 2, 3 more social media channels or channels that are trying to target a particular audience to make sure they go those key council messages. So yeah, this is definitely something to explore. Even down to what your suggestions about what days are our bins. That's something that's it's definitely something to explore, and that the new website, I think, will look to address if possible. And finally, I think the talk about what we call ourselves, the language, the tone, being concise, how we engage our audience and residents, that is absolutely key. We look continually at what, of course, our fellow local authorities do up and down the country, particularly those in more urban areas or those that have got a less rural setting than ourselves. And there's some exceptionally great content that could be transferred, and that we could go down a different route that would probably engage a younger audience. The difference why we haven't made maybe such stark changes in terms of tone and language is partly because, somebody might correct me if I'm wrong here, but we've still got the oldest demographic of any population in the county, and that's not the only reason to do that. It's one of the reasons we have to be as wise as we can be to make a change around tone and language as much as possible, because ultimately we're still delivering services for people who pay council tax, and we need to make sure we get that balance right, ensuring that getting that key message out there and making sure it's effective, but in a way that all of our demographic can engage with. So yeah, but I would have thought even in the timeline of this strategy, you might see definitely us stretching our wings a little bit, looking at what else can engage a younger audience. We talked about what Councillor Jeffries raised earlier about engaging a younger demographic. we'll definitely be looking to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question or two, perhaps, on the Putting People First survey. We've got numerous percentages. 64% of residents think the council keeps them well informed. The worrying one for me is the 55% of Rushcliffe residents trust the council. Does that implies that 45% don't? And if they don't, why not? Have we asked the question? Have we sounded them out? And what our targets are? We must have targets that we're trying to achieve in these areas. Just wondering where we're up to on those. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we visited a previous community scrutiny group around the resident survey, so I think we visited that in terms of part of the questions are a little bit to do with perception. When you talk about trust, it can be we've maybe been a victim of over-analysing some of the data, but that's still something that we take very seriously. That if you put it in that context, that 45% of people don't trust the council, there's a variety of reasons why they may have said that, and I think we've revisited that before. But I'll look to do it again, and I would imagine that when we bring this to this scrutiny group or the relevant group, we look at the resident survey, that will be the point in case that we'll look at, say, the former results said this, so do we need to look into this in a more way and go back to those residents and ask them why? Or is it a case that we need to have that question with some or subsequent reasons why they feel they don't trust the council? Is it a one specific issue? Is it more wider reasons? So we'll look to address that at the time. And in terms of where we are at, we do it routinely. So 2025 is the next resident survey. We use the LGA guide markers at that point to say what's the national average, and then we look at it against those. In most cases, the recent resident survey was in line with the LGA, barring, I think, the points that have already been raised this evening in terms of those lower percentages that are something that we need to address. Apologies in terms of I can come back to you in terms of what the latest is from the last time with the resident survey of where we're at and what we're doing around it. So I can come back to you separate this meeting, Councillor Healy.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask some of the areas that's been put on the action plan and what's been raised, just to ask some further points where Councillor Jones said about different languages. Can't remember if you mentioned about kind of people that are like with sight loss who kind of doing it as an audio. Is there also the capacity of having sign language on the videos and that type of thing, or kind of with the new website having elements that are able to be audio, and so they're able to have different kind of the text kind of read out for them. Also, have you, when you're putting out the messages, and of course the email that goes out to residencies on a Sunday morning, I take there was some rationale behind for why that goes out on a Sunday. Have you looked at when kind of when's the best with some of the messages that goes out, and the type of message when it's best to communicate that during the day but also during the week to get the best impact? Because of course with Facebook there's all these algorithms and other things that for people that, depending on when you put it out, is to have the best engagement around that. And it's kind of good that you're open to looking at different social media platforms for the different groups. And of course, like at the moment with the younger generation, TikTok's very popular, so it's kind of, if there's that kind of content that councils could do, I'm not saying doing TikTok dances and all that type of thing, but just kind of putting some of the messages out there that also might help with a visual and audio impact, and that could be content used on other social media platforms that could then help integrate on another. Again, with the internal surveys, and that's done with the staff, because it mentioned about how the staff are, how they feel with working for the council. How is that kind of disseminated out to them and communicated with them, and is that kind of looked at with different teams and areas of the council and how and the departments and that they look at and how they feel in those kind of areas? And is it just as a whole, as an organisation, and is it kind of drilled down into those different aspects?
Thank you.
It all comes down to the councillors. Now, if you sit in the council chamber at a full meeting, and I usually sit over there so I can see everyone, are we all approachable by people who've got a problem? I don't know that we are. Some people are more outgoing and smiling and so on, but if people aren't approachable, we're not going to get off the ground, are we? And we really ought to be looking at people and perhaps trying to change their demeanour, you know. I have this view that being in government at whatever level, you've got to start out in a small way in your own village or parish and do your time there. And next time around, move up, you know, to the town or the city. And then the third time round, you're ready to be a member of parliament. I'm astonished at the members of parliament who haven't got a clue. It's nothing to do with their political view, but they don't know what they're doing there. And it's quite obvious that a lot of them are making a lot of mistakes. So perhaps as councillors, we could all look at one another and say, are we actually approachable? If someone in my village has got a problem, would they come and tell me about it? Well, actually, the three of us in Copgrave are very lucky. Don't ever live in a village unless you can appreciate that everyone there will know the most intimate details of your private and personal life. You can't sneeze without them knowing up the road. And I think that a lot of this comes down to all of us. How do we behave? Are we approachable? Would you actually go up to that person if you've got a really serious problem? So perhaps we could sort of look.
Just to address that first point, we at town and parish forums relatively regularly have a communications update. It's only one example, but we address that about if you use social media, how do you use it? Do you use it in a positive fashion? When to use it, when not to. So I hope that can be the starter of going towards some of that approachability talk about. It's a maybe separate issue to what we're talking about this evening, but certainly there's elements of what we do with communication that can nudge people and educate further. Absolutely. Just a point to the chair, sorry, going back to, yeah, absolutely, you can look at audio sign language options again in similar fashion to the languages point on social media. I'm sure that's something that I think will become ever more accessible in the coming years. Going to the email subscription updates Sunday mornings, it's as ever with communications, the $64,000 question, if you'll pardon the phrase, in terms of when to engage with people and what times. Certainly we know we get good engagement on weekend mornings. People have got the time to digest the content. That's a sweetened generalisation to some degree because, of course, there's many people who are not available on a weekend morning, but certainly there is a higher percentage, and we find the reach that we get on social media, for example, is good at that time. So it's the same reason for the email subscriptions at that time, but we'll continually review it. The examples of TikTok, yeah, it's exactly what we will explore in these next 3 years. I wouldn't say at this stage we commit to any particular channel. Some of them come and go as quickly as you can introduce them, but there's definitely a way in which we can engage even better with those younger generations that are on those channels. Well, not even younger generations, people from across the demographics for that matter. So we'll certainly look at that. I think the other points you just talked about were just the internal surveys. They go right down to team level. We've got very, very specific data in terms of, and that gets addressed accordingly through service managers, lead specialists, team leaders. Yeah.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't say at the outset thanks for your report, because I think your report, but also the comments, have just shown how complex the communications from the council are. Secondly, I wouldn't be bothered about the click on, subscribe on the council's website. I never do it. I frequently go on the website, but I'm blowed if I'm going to sign up to yet another regular thing. So I wouldn't be too fretting about that. But lastly, picking up Councillor Walker's broad shoulders issue, one of the most controversial functions of the council is planning. And I'm sure if you ask the public for their views on it, you get a variety of responses. And it may be quite difficult to explain the parameters of and considerations of planning and its ever-changing and regulation and guidance from the government. But I just think that's a really good issue that's important to a lot of people.
I think that's something that we can definitely look at when we talk about doing education and council services, social media advocacy. That's exactly what we're looking at with things like planning. It is very challenging, I think, with a service area such as planning, the complexities, the intricacies of it, and as to how you get to a certain reason. Which I certainly know to some degree, it takes such a length of time to explain the rationale behind a decision. It's very, very difficult to do it in a concise manner. Talk about what Councillor Malland was talking about. There is maybe an answer that in this ever digital generation of an answer needing to be concise, and I need to understand it in a certain few seconds, otherwise my attention span is gone and I can't do it, and that's a challenge for us. So that's what hopefully we can develop on social media and other channels over time.
Is there any other councillors? Yeah.
I will be really quick. So just looking specifically at the action plan points, because to reinforce one point I made earlier, I've had a reread of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think all 11 fall into the sort of tell and sell boxes. I don't think any of them fit into sort of ask or, dare I even say, delegate boxes. So could we have a think about that? And then on a side point, one reflection I've had is, in terms of that, how can I influence decisions? How can I be listened to? I have to defer to other people who are there at cabinet, but certainly at council, every council meeting we have citizens' questions. Very rare that they are asked. So what, if anything, could we do to, have a queue of people rather than one once in a blue moon?
Thank you. Yeah, take that point on board. Absolutely. If there is too much tell and sell, as you call it, and we need to go back and say, you said we did more, and reflect on that. Absolutely. I think we can tweak that action plan. No problem to that. Very much take on board about the influencing decisions as well. In a sort of fashion, and I don't really want to make a direct comparison, but Councillor Jones's point about plan. And having the time for people to want to understand about council functions and why decisions are made in a certain way. The first 12 months or so that was at the council building on a previous campaign, there was limited engagement or desire on social media to understand that more. So citizens' questions, for example, was a campaign to put it out there when it was first introduced, and there hasn't been maybe the reaction to it that we anticipated. So we need to revisit it. We need to look at why that's the case, and to some degree as well, because we have got channels that are ever more or hopefully engaging. The information is there, the answer is there, but that's not to say for a moment that we need to not keep pushing it, because you're right. It's another channel. It's another very public channel and transparent channel that us as a council should be pushing. So yeah, we'll certainly revisit it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for all those comments, and I think we've gone through and hopefully provided Ed with quite a lot of feedback on that strategy. So I think just going at the Once my laptop's loaded up, what the recommendation is, I think it is to review the plan contained within the external internal communication strategy and to make any further suggestions to officers they feel appropriate. And I think we've met that recommendation, and that's been asked of us tonight. So I think we
just need to agree that
we don't need to propose.
just need to agree.
No, if I can just have a show of hands to agree that we've demonstrated and done and fulfilled that requirement of the report. Thank you very much. And now on to the next strategy, again from Ed, the communicate customer access strategy.
Thank you. We'll just go straight into the strategy overview here, similar fashion to the external and internal comms. So our last customer, it wasn't named customer access strategy, but our last customer strategy expired in 2017. Significant changes in resident behaviour brought about by COVID-19. Probably a little bit of overlap with what we just talked about in communications. It seems in some ways a little bit of a world away, even though it was only 5 years ago. And that really is a little bit of a theme of what we've got running through this particular strategy. We want to deliver a contemporary, efficient, easy to use contact channels for our customers, enable residents to access services where and when they need them, and enhanced by, obviously another theme this evening, increasing digital access. We want to respond to our customers' current and future needs too. Another reason why we are, again, only looking at a 3-year strategy and not longer. Tailor services as then within our existing budgets and build on channel shift. And by that, I mean the impact that COVID has had. It means that customers now engage with us differently, and they've shifted over, as you'll see from the report, in many ways to web, email, rather than necessarily phone or face-to-face. With the latter, there's still a significant number of people who do engage in that way, but there has been that significant shift. The strategy then is identifying, exploring innovative digital options. It will certainly help the fact that, again, the new website is looking to be launched next year, and that'll be a key fundamental part of the offer digitally to our customers. But we need to have an explore, and this is what the strategy is looking to do, to relate to, adapt to new technologies and services, whilst getting that balance of traditional face-to-face and over the phone. And particularly looking at our customer service sites, we need to work with partners and our communities to make sure that they are face-to-face, certainly sites that are accessible, sites that people feel they can come in and ask a question, no matter how small or big, and access our services as they have done historically. And key to this as well, as this strategy evolves over the next 3 years, is build on research and best practice. Similar fashion to the communications strategies, we need to continue and also look at where their channel shifts, good and bad, has been as a result of the pandemic. So on this particular strategy then, we've got some actual key themes for each part of the action plan: building and exploring innovation, embedding further self-service, and that's a key part, again, to really launch that digital element of when we get face-to-face inquiries, that we can play our role in trying to educate and upskill customers who maybe just need that confidence, need those extra few skills to just be engaged, and make that ever more convenient to access our services. Review and build on partnerships, and again, another key one, like the communication strategy, listen and respond. That two-way street is very, very important, and we'll look to develop that, especially as we go down the themes and projects around trying to engage more audiences digitally. So moving on to the action plan then itself. This is just a summary of the points you've got in front of you this evening. Identify and explore new contact channels, develop, embed self-service, increase channel to online options, aided by free Wi-Fi at our customer service sites, showcasing those digital solutions to customers who may not be aware or may not have the skills to do so, review existing contact point locations, using our team, our very, very hard-working team, 15 customer service advisors, 2 supervisors to further shape services, signpost customers to those digital skills, also have clear customer service standards across our sites. A really key part is ensuring that the expectations of residents are met, that they can see and respond and understand the timeframes in which we respond with the information we do. Review service level agreements with partners. Things have changed from before COVID at our sites, looking at where we can work together further. Monitor customer feedback and satisfaction. That's a real key theme in the coming years. Looking at our systems for ever more responsive service. I think we're in a good place with what we've got in terms of from telephony right through to being as fast as possible to respond to people quickly and efficiently, including on social media, but we need to keep that firmly in our focus. And finally, reshaping postal communication. That's still a key part, again, for those customers and those residents that aren't digitally engaged. They still need that option, but we need to look at how that looks over the next 3 years.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Malinder.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm particularly pleased to see that we've still got the options for people visiting in person and by phone. One thing, having spent a chunk of this morning on hold, not to Rushcliffe, but to another local authority's IT section. One of the things that winds me up, and I know it winds up a lot of people when they're on hold, constant references by the little recorded voice to go and try and use the website when most people are on the phone because they can't find or get what they want through the website. It irritates people no end. So just a plea for some thought about what the messaging is while people are waiting, because people do accept they're going to have to wait for a while, but not with a message that's just massively irritating them, please.
Councillor Murray.
The contact point on Gordon Road, when it was in the old police station, that seemed to be open a lot more than the one on Gordon Road. I mean, that's closed 3 days a week, and the other days it's only open half the day. Are you thinking of expanding the amount of time people can pop in there?
I'll just answer that first point first. Having looked at the figures and what we've done, that shift we talked about through email and web traffic means that we're sticking with the opening hours at present. That's because in terms of producing a service that's within budget, we would need to probably employ further staff to open, for example, 5 days a week instead of the current 3. Because of that shift over and that change in behaviour, we're deliberately opening the hours that we are. And whilst anecdotally we get some information to say, you know, we might expect you to be open longer, there isn't the demand that we're finding. The figures that we're finding, I think at Westbridge, for example, I think it says 276 a month was the average for what we're looking at. That's probably closer to about 400 now. So for roughly 400 people a month coming through the door, that is significantly down for the era of the police station. For example, the old RCCC, we're in a different era. I think if routinely we were getting that anecdotal feedback day in, day out, that people needed us open more, we'd be reviewing it. But certainly when we were looking at the strategy, there wasn't the need to. We've looked at what other local authorities have done, others in the county and elsewhere, and they've done the same. And in certain places, they're open even less. Their contact points, we've got the most contact points of anywhere in the county within the 3 locations. So we hope that we've got the balance right at the moment. But I take your on board your point in terms of at the point at which someone wants to access the service. It might be on a day when we are not open in person, and we'll continue to review that. We'll continue to listen and feedback, but certainly all the data suggests that engagement is switched over to that digital side. It's been fast-tracked by COVID, I'm sure, but we'll continue to look at what people want, what people need. The other point, sorry, about the the hold message. One of the things that we're looking about in the action plan is one of the reasons that we'll keep probably signposting to the website is that there will be ever more ways in which you can find that answer and you can engage. We're looking at chat options, chatbot options, ways in which you can get that answer back to you. And whilst the key word here is explore, and that we, in the lifetime of the strategy, need to look at what can be made effective to ensure that when people, if they've been on the website and they can't find the information or haven't got an answer, why is that? And that's what the new website will hopefully go a long way towards, but also what else, what other features on it can assist people to get that information quicker. And it might be that you don't need to ring up because there is a chat option in which you can get that answer quicker. The key to it all is getting the balance right of whatever method you want to choose to contact the council. It will still be here in this next 3 years, and we've just need to analyse exactly what will help people even further.
Council Manager, did you want to come back with a question?
So it was just a point that, yeah, I totally get that, and I get that it's, you know, people want to go to the website. That's fine. I agree with that. I'm not against that at all. It is that you do see people at work and offices trying to get through, end up literally screaming at their phones, I just want to speak to a human being, because they can't get that bit of nuanced information, or even for, you know, a chat bot. They are incredibly sophisticated, I do agree, but there's always got to be that option there for people to get through by phone, to actually talk to a real person, and for the message that they're getting while they're on hold not to be something that just winds them up even more, because it does.
Yeah, absolute point in case. I mean, even just this morning, the customer service centre, I overheard a customer say, I just want to come and speak to somebody. There is a huge element of that, of the delivery of this service, that we are committed to. And I hope we're committed to it more than some other local authorities. It's been a really, really key part of looking at our demographic of population, of what they need at a given time. And there is an element of that we definitely need to keep. It's just how that evolves in the next 3 years is going to be the thing that we're going to really keep an eye on and change accordingly, because we need that option, absolutely. But similar to what the action plan is trying to do, it's trying to upskill them also digitally wherever possible, and probably try and explore the reasons why they're either not digitally engaged, they haven't considered trying a digital option first, because there's certainly a volume of customers that come through the door that are simply not in that behaviour way. They either haven't got access to a device that can do it. That's absolutely something that we obviously can't necessarily control, but there are a percentage of people who have got the option and they're simply not skilled or educated enough in that way, and that's part of something that we'll want to try and address with the strategy.
Councillor Jeffries.
I use the telephone quite a lot, and there's one company that I deal with, and when I phone them up, they say blah blah blah, you know, nice chat and all that. You are number 6 in the queue, right? I do wish they would all do this, because, you know, my husband actually spent 1 hour and 53 minutes waiting on the phone to get the electricity company the other day, you know, and had 2 cups of coffee while he was there, while I, you know, it does help if you know whereabouts you are in the queue. It stops you going around the bends. Someone can go and put the kettle on, you know, and restore you. But it really does help if you know, just to sit there and sit there and sit there. It's not good for any of us. So if we could, you know, be a bit more helpful.
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, Jeffries. Yes, certainly we'll explore that. I think we like to think that for the vast majority of the time, you're not in a queue long enough that you need to know your queue position with us. You shouldn't be waiting longer than, I can't say define a few minutes, but it shouldn't be longer than that you should need to. But it's something we'll definitely explore. We're very aware of, if you take the huge volume of calls that we took about the £150 energy rebate earlier this year, for example, from central government, through to our garden waste service, that we have a very, very busy time of year in January, February and March. It could be something that we explore. So we'll look at that with our providers of our systems and see what we can explore, because if that's something that is key and and that's maybe something we need to go out to on survey with and find out. It's not something that I've anecdotally heard is an issue, because people hopefully aren't waiting anywhere near as long as they need to know that, but we'll certainly explore it.
And of course, while you're waiting,
Councillor Change.
I was going to make the exact same point. The number, you actually don't know how long you're going to be waiting, even if it's fairly, within a minute or two. So I think the sequence that you're positioned in the queue is the most customer friendly approach, rather than screeching music and keeping on telling you about, do you know you can access our website. In the patient participation group that I'm part of, the GPs are observing that the trend is going back to more face-to-face, that there's a bounce back after COVID. Whether it'll revert again if there's another wave is another matter. So I wouldn't necessarily write off the or say that the change, although I'm sure the change will be, as you say, I think you might find that some of the face-to-face coming back. But so I think the problem with the West Bridgeford place is it's nowhere near as prominent as it was before. And I think the thing that would probably make it most prominent would be if it provided a public toilet. Because then people would go in and they think, oh, I might. So, I mean, that's just a thought. But presumably you've got some analysis of what the issues are, or what the sort of customers are who do go to face-to-face. So it'd be interesting to know how they differ from the general population. But I do think there's something about making the place more attractive, which it was before. There was a public loo in the police station, and there were a number of functions all in the one place.
Just come back on that, yeah. So take your point on the patient participation group, a little bit different in terms of health. I think that you could understand why you would want to chat to a health professional face to face for various reasons that might be slightly different to a customer services function. But I take that point on board, and I think this is what we were really mindful of, looking at the local authorities that have shut contact points, have massively reduced their hours at their main customer service centre more than we have, and they're only open, I think, in one case, only 1 day a week, for example. That at the moment, certainly, this is why, this is a holding strategy, for want of a better phrase, because we need to assess that need. You talk about that bounce back.
Staff aren't wasted, are they? Because they're answering phone calls.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's just assessing what that bounce back is and what it looks like in the coming years. In terms of your points, about Fountain Court instead of the former RCCC, we would take that on board in terms of its prominence, location, and people being aware of it. We'll look at that. We can't offer a public toilet facility for various reasons. I think, as well, if nothing else, just the lease possibly won't entertain that. It probably wouldn't as well have the access that the previous RCCC did. It obviously acted as a police station as well, and there were different needs for some of the customers coming in that sort of warranted that public toilet. The public toilet facilities are also available relatively close by, just on the other side of the croquet lawn in central West Bridgeford. There's other local, I think there's also one retailer locally who has a toilet facility. Maybe we've got a role in ensuring that the public are aware what's locally available, but it might be tricky to have a WC available for, as I said, reasons of the lease. Talk about attractive, making it more accessible. We'll certainly look at that. We've looked at, for example, the vinyl window displays of shop. We had a local shop safe message that was on for a period of time. We've got a look at the moment in terms of something that's reflecting on Her Majesty's reign, who sadly passed away recently. This is the sort of example of where we're looking to try and make it more attractive and make it stand out on the high street so people know that we are there. Again, it's just trying to get that balance right in terms of an and also them knowing exactly what our opening hours are. But no, it's food for thought, absolutely.
I just wanted to get further question on some of the bits that have been raised. With you mentioned about the chatbots, and again, they kind of got useful on the websites and that. Take it if the chatbot can't find the answer, it will then potentially direct them to a person, then help them. Will that also have a function on it of where you are in a queue, if there is such a queue as well, and then give the facility to either message or to let them know the possibility of then registering sending an email type message to them. And with the phone calls, do we ever look at kind of how long people potentially are on hold, as well as because like I'm not giving in, we've got to be the same targets, but like with the police and the emergency services, they often look at how long people are on the phone and have a target. But do we just out of interest just see how long people are kind of waiting on the phone, and then just as a give with strategy to kind of get those back and make it more accessible for them? And touching on like the accessibility of the contact centre points, like on Gordon Road, have we kind of thought about getting the staff out on like roadshows? Because there is only a few places on the list that we've had in the report: Cockrave, Bingham, West Bridgford, and East League. But like Ruddington and Keyworth don't have a contact point. But would there kind of be a way of having them go to a place there and have that advertised, that there's somebody from the council that's able to provide a face-to-face, and likewise elsewhere in West Bridgford as well? Because sometimes residents are having to travel to Central Avenue, but if there was other places around like Gamston at the centre there and other things like that.
Thanks, Chair. Certainly on the chat, this is what we'll look at. A system that can fall in line with many other private sector businesses if you contact them through that same means. Even if you're not able to get an answer immediately, it will give you a time frame as to when you can. Similar option if we explore, for example, a WhatsApp function that again will outline a time frame as to when you can expect an answer back on your question. So yeah, if that system, once consulted on, once explored fully, is something that we roll out during the time frame of the strategy, yeah, it will absolutely be in line with the latest expectations. And I imagine that shouldn't be a problem, and that our service provider who we've used historically, or another, if it went out to tender, I'm sure we'll be able to supply. Phone calls on hold, certainly we look at, I mean, it's on the screen in front of me day in, day out in terms of length of call and how many people on hold. Anecdotally, and I can't roll a statistic out for you here and now, but certainly I'd be surprised that the vast majority of calls there wouldn't be in a queue for any longer than 5 minutes. Now, I don't want to commit to that. I can come back to you with a statistic as to what that is, but it's certainly in that time frame in terms of the volume of calls that we've got now. We're in that position of building on that channel shift. It's not, you're probably not on hold as long as you might have been in previous times, because there's a more customers, more of our residents are simply doing their business online, and that's shown from everything in terms of particularly website visits and website visits as well on mobile, on tablet. It's hugely increased in the last 2 years, and therefore that has definitely helped in terms of call times and queue times going down. Final point just about the staff roadshows. That's probably really it would be an over and above for us in a service that we can look at and see if there's a desire for that. Maybe that's a piece of work that we can look at to see if there's a desire in the communities to go out. It's probably at odds with what we're trying to achieve here with the digital element of it. Is that the time that we'd spent potentially doing those roadshows, we would actually look to try and upskill individuals to do so. It could be that we use a roadshow to do that, but it would possibly be at odds in terms of we're going out to you face to face, when actually we've got the digital capability for people to be able to get their queries answered in a separate fashion. We're in somewhat of a different era now, but I don't want to discount it completely. I think the point about Keyworth, I think you give some Wuddington, there was a contact point historically at Keyworth that closed simply because of lack of use. And I probably would only point as well to, as much as it's very important we look at these contact points, the usage that you can see in some places in terms of it is a challenge for us that we need to make sure that people know it's there and it's accessible, but they are possibly underutilised. And we need to look at it during these next 3 years to go, why is that the case? Are they actually, is there a need in terms of that, can we increase that usage there? Or is it simply because of other reasons, because people contact us and are used to those behaviours contacting us in different ways? But the roadshow we'll look at, we'll explore it and see if it's something that we can, is worthwhile delivering.
What I meant with the roadshow was like those locations where we don't have a physical presence just for the people that might not want to or able to go on, just so there's kind of some time in the week that they can be advertised in like the print form, that they can then go there, because like you see a lot of banks that have been closing branches, and certainly in Bingham we have a visit every so often by a mobile bank to kind of try and meet that demand for people that can't go to the locations of where they are. And also with the chatbot function, will that have built in as well that if they're asking about an inquiry that isn't to do with the borough council, that it could kind of direct and say, like, if it's an inquiry at the county council and stuff like that, because then that might negate, and also the need for them people contacting then a human to ask that, and then them getting directed by a human, that the chatbots might kind of know that kind of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same fashion as well about the new website being able to cancel on this point, which council does what. That's a really, really key point, and we'll try and make that as prominent as possible. Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Walker, you next on.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested in these numbers on the table at 4.2 about the phone, face-to-face contact points, the numbers there. Being frank, they're the ones that cost the council the money. So I wondered I'll be interested to know, perhaps not tonight, but at a later date, anything you can share with us, sort of that drills down into those in terms of like what those inquiries are. A few, very understandably, a few of our colleagues have referred to situations where in our own lives we need to speak to a human. And I think one of the things that is easy to conflate is needing to speak to a human and wanting to speak to a human, and they're not always the same. And I would be guilty of that, of wanting to at some stage, but in my head thinking I need to. No, I want to. And it does cost taxpayers money to provide the quality, so that we are different to a private business in that in that sense. And no doubt there is a correlation between the cost of the service and the quality of it. I want my bin to be emptied every week, particularly at Christmas when I know it's getting full, but I don't get that. So I perhaps unpopularly would ask us to particularly on these face-to-face points, the strategy to address where people need to speak to us. We need to provide that. Where they only want to, all and every effort should. I don't think we should be shy about saying we're going to. One of the polite phrases in the report is nudge. Well, perhaps it could be a bit more of a shove. And yeah, I recognise that could be unpopular, but keeping in mind the huge cost differential between somebody phoning up to pay for their garden waste and paying it online, massive difference at scale. And I just perhaps we could be a bit more aggressive perhaps about that.
Thanks. Yeah, really valid point. I think the key in the action plan again is getting our customer service advisors to say, when they get their call in, to say, identify what's the difference between want and need. If it's a want, to say, do you know you could have done this? You could have had this inquiry answered digitally today. Do you know? Have you got the skills? This is what is going to be our real focus more amongst them in the next 3 years is to give that opportunity to say, did you know you can? And if you didn't, well, have you tried? Why have you not tried? What are the barriers? And I do appreciate that's exactly what we're trying to build on here, because sadly, in many ways, and it's for the reason we've got to this point anyway, is the pandemic has shown that there is a volume of people, increasing volume of people who can do that and access services in a certain way. It's just about preference. So as you said, between want and need. Going back to your first question about number of calls or the length of calls, it's certainly the benefits and revenues that are the ones that take the lengthest of times, and we probably get the most calls on, barring outside garden waste annually. As you might imagine, in terms of the volume of calls we get on that, or annual billing for council tax, you're looking at very much people being dealt with where the benefits and revenues inquiries. So that's something we need to focus on. And again, it's got to go hand in hand. We've got to try and do as much as we can this next 3 years to develop people's digital skills, because there's still elements of that if they are educated, or furthering people who are educated, you know that you can get them on the right track, that they won't need to come back to us either over the phone or face to face. They'll have that skill. They'll, be confident about using it on even their device that we've got. And part of the reason why we've brought in, we will bring in, such as free Wi-Fi, is the fact that at that point of access, when they walk in, we can show them and say, well, you can get on if you've got a digital device, we can work with you to make sure you can access the service. We still know there's a volume of people who will not be in that bracket, and they simply won't have a digital device for whatever reason. But we're absolutely going to be as committed as we can to try and push people in this direction in the nicest possible way. Work with them is key. Understand it, and we'll get hundreds and thousands of interactions, I'm sure, in the coming years as to a reason why people may not want to do it. Is it a confidence thing? Do we need to persist with it? It isn't just asking once, it's asking more than once. We'll absolutely rise to that challenge.
Councillor Pudgy-Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to labour on the point of physical access, and I take Councillor Walker's point, but I suppose we've got to be careful, as I think the banks generally have got a bad reputation because they are clearly pushing people down the stairs into the new way of doing things. Do we really want to do that? I read somewhere yesterday, I can't remember which newspaper it was, or was it yesterday or the day before? We can't find it now, annoyingly, but there was a survey that came up with 22% do not have access to computers or digital. But the ONS are saying on their website that it's 10%, 5 million. Whatever, it's clearly a section of society that we don't want to leave behind. And I'm interested in these figures on page 4. I see up to March 22, the average face-to-face in West Bridgford was 276, but then that went up during this summer to 480 visits a month. Now, I'm sure there's reasons for that. Presumably around about April time, we've got lots of visitors with council tax queries, maybe. So I can see the averaging may not tell the whole story to us immediately. And when I went in a few times to West Bridgford this year, which was something I realised I hadn't done for a long while. And I did notice how busy Central Avenue and indeed Gordon Road is these days, and it was very encouraging. So, going up to 480 visits a month, I wonder whether Councillor Murray was perhaps onto something there, that maybe we might need to consider being open at least one more day or whatever, depending on how, managing staff rotas, of course, is not our specific problem or challenge. It's a management thing. I get that. But clearly there is demand in West Bridgford. And looking at Cotgrave, Eastleigh and Bingham,
which obviously are a lot less. I do wonder whether they could be more advertised. There's quite an aggressive campaign going on locally with promoting the Bingham market, and absolutely, totally agree with that. But I have to say, I don't think really we push it out that there are local hubs, and I'm sure we do have substantial sections in our community that, and I presume most of the visits face to face would involve perhaps paperwork where somebody needs clearly to. Otherwise, I suppose most of them do it by phone if they haven't got access to. So I think we're in a period of transition. At some point, we will get to a society which is like Blade Runner, but we're not there yet, and I don't know when we're going to get there. So we've got to look after this section that that clearly is amongst all of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see the point of where we're at in 3 years' time when we renew this conversation. Just to go on the points that you raised, as per 4.3, nationally, one survey suggests 84% of adults have got a smartphone. That is maybe ties in with the 10% survey you talked about. If you're suggesting 22% are not engaging through digital means, it might be close to that. We'll keep an eye on that in terms of what the latest figures are, but certainly I think this is what the strategy is trying to say, is that we know there is enough people who are not digitally engaged for whatever reason that we need to be there for them for their queries, and that's what we'll continue to be. It's just how that evolves in that transition in the next few years. Really good point. I mean, I'd even highlighted myself in terms of the 276 going up to, I think I said to the chair, roughly close to the 400 mark now. The only the sort of context I can put it in is that pre-COVID average that's in the strategy, I mean, 816. So, it's half of what it was pre-pandemic. And that is where we've got to respond to it. We have to juggle our resources accordingly because of that demand. And I take your point in terms of that's probably one of the reasons as well that we haven't advertised our face-to-face services as much, because of that shift. If we're identifying ever more people who are able to gain that service, then we need to obviously ensure that they are ever more educated and skilled to do it. The key about this as well is always trying to provide value for money. So in the context of cost of living going up and council tax being what it is, we need to deliver a service that is ever more value for money. So as a result, we need to look at ways in which, for example, advertising, if we an advertising campaign and so forth, that may not be cost effective. That's only one example. But in terms of resourcing this particular service, we need to continue to look at ways in which we can deliver it ever better value. I'd hope that's something that residents would appreciate, that we're not trying to have a higher cost service, that the cost of the service will only ever go down wherever possible. That's not to say it won't be resourced as much, but that we can do things in a smarter, more efficient way. And it's possibly where that advertising those contact points, we can actually make sure that people are aware and they get it through the door. Bushing Reports is there in print. They can see, they can access the service. I think it's on the back page as well, opening hours of each one. But we've got to get that balance right to make sure that we're not actually increasing cost of the service to something that isn't directly engaging those following what's happened with COVID and that channel shift.
Councillor James, do you have your hand up there?
Thank you. Returning to the face-to-face issue, I've got a number of experiences which I think just show how important that is. And I slightly differ from Councillor Walker's view, which seemed to imply that there was an excessive cost on and face-to-face stuff. But if staff are dealing with the phone answering, then it doesn't seem to me like a waste of staff or money. And I recall a number of occasions meeting people outside here wanting to visit the council and having to try to direct them and not being sure when it was open. So people do come here expecting face to face. So it is important that there's a face to face. I visited the West Bridgeford Contact Centre with a resident to register on home search. Now, I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, and I'm told by the staff that people manage to do it by the phone or by the computer, but I could not understand the form, nor could the resident. So it required some knowledgeable help. And many people, as this person, might have a phone, but they don't have a printer. And quite often there's a requirement to print some document off and sign and send it. So it's a little bit more complicated than just going electronic, I think. And I've had the same experience with a housing association recently. Because I've got a printer, I print it off for the resident. And because I can scan it, I can reply. But a lot of people need the face-to-face places to do those sort of functions. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I think that's, it's deliberately why we've still got those facilities in place. You're absolutely right. The numbers of people needing that service, they may be decreasing. I emphasise may, because until we get more analysis on that, we'll need to look at where we're going with it. But yeah, we know there almost always going to be a need for an face-to-face service of some description for those that haven't got all of the tools at their disposal to get that done. But yes, forms, for example, are something that we'd look to standardise even more and try and influence partners. For home search, for example, it might not be ourselves as the council's form. It could be a partner's form that needs to be ever more accessible. But I take your point on Ward, absolutely. We've got things like scan station options as well. Again, it's part of our drive is to try and educate where possible that even if you haven't got a printer at home, you've got other options to try and get that piece of information to the agency that you need to. But again, we've got to go on that journey with individuals to try and ensure they're aware of this. So it's getting that balance right.
Councillor Malander.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that actually sort of brings me rather neatly to the bit about reviewing service level agreements with partner organisations. How's that going to work and what will that look like? I think it's a good example there. Quite often when you get bills or other information through from power companies and so on, a lot of them fairly lazily, in my opinion, just send a PDF attachment that's exactly the same as the format that you used to get through the post. And then when people are asked to input data into something else online, that looks completely different. So people really struggle to find, please insert this number here, and they look at it, and there's umpteen different numbers, usually in tiny print and different sizes all over the place on the PDF. So I guess with that in mind, we're working in partners. Are we going to be sort of pushing back on them to actually make the information that they send out much more alike in terms of the online versus the old postal ones, so it's more comprehensible? And it would make it much easier for us as well when people sort of come to us and say, I've got this information, I'm trying to find something to do with housing or whatever. How is that going to work?
There's service level agreements. We've been continual conversation with our partners. If you take Inspire for the libraries, for example, at Cotgrave, we switched our opening hours from a Tuesday to a Monday to assist them. That they've made means that the library in Cotgrave can open an extra day as a result of us switching our hours. We're continually looking at ways in which we can assist partners to do that. So that's where service level agreements come in, but also very much what we've been looking at in certain other ways is that on, for example, the days that Fountain Court is not open in West Bridgeford, is there a possibility for us in a positive way to sweat that asset? Can we work with other partners? Is the space workable to look at who can use the space, public sector partners or otherwise? So that's something that we'll always look at. We're doing at the moment, for example, as well. Our partners that were, if you look at the logos as you come into Fountain Court, when we haven't got window vinyl on, they were inserted pre-pandemic, and all of them had a need at that time to potentially use part of the space in the office, be it for an hour a week or less. the amount of partners now that have reshaped their services where they don't need that offering. They've honed their digital offering to a point where they don't need it, means that we've got much less partners than we did. But you'd be surprised, and Councillor Jones talks about bounce back, those conversations now have re-emerged. People aren't, there is a need for them. So we'll continue to review service level agreements with partners and have those conversations to make sure it isn't just a closed shop, that we can use the assets that we've got and explore where they can go. Just in terms of your update, in terms of making sure the numbers on forms, letters are clear. I hope the success of the garden waste scheme is the real point in case of this. That's something that we've introduced, obviously, in the last decade, if not beyond, and the success of that year on year, numbers going up, means that one of the items, the feedback we get, is how easy that service is to sign up to. Now, it may not be for every single service going, but certainly I would hope that as well in the major council tax correspondence that we get, for example, that's letter, that correspondence will be honed over a certain number of time, and it isn't a common, it's anecdotal feedback, admittedly, issue that we get in terms of when customers get in touch to say they can't find that relevant number, but it's very true. With organisations, they do have problems, and I think it's probably something that we could potentially read into the action plan, is to have a review to make sure that correspondence is as clear as possible.
I've just got a couple of questions on areas. With the website, as it says in 4.3, 82% have a smartphone. Of course, people are constantly using smartphones more and more, and tablets to access. But sometimes websites that are on a desktop, laptop aren't always user-friendly on these devices and interacting. Is there kind of a thought being put into the website that it's for these functions that can be changed from desktop to a mobile function? And if anything, is there kind of been any scope of like an app or anything looked at? Because so residents can, with a council tax and green bin and any other services that can go through, because I think the county council have a app now for and then there's kind of information can come through there, and updates and any other alerts for residents, which if there is the exploration of a future app or with the website, I know when you log on to the website, you can see what your dates of your bins are and your next one is. Is there a way kind of people are able to sync those to their calendars for the future? Because that's always a common question. I think Councillor Mallender outlined it. It's always on the WhatsApp group. When's the next bin and that? So if they had it kind of linked to their Apple and that account, that could go and find out when it's going to be in the calendar. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah, and it's something that the new website is definitely going to try and address. That's that option of exploring if we can go down the route of bin alerts. So that information is front and centre to those. We've got other ways and means as well in terms of we can get that information across via email as well. Naturally, it would be the most convenient way someone can access that information as possible, but that will be addressed with the new website, we hope, certainly. It's certainly a priority. In terms of just your previous question, we dipped over last year that over 50% of website visits are now done by a smartphone or tablet device, and it was already configured many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, is my understanding, that the website, yes, fully configured, no matter what device or format you're on, you should be able to access that service regardless. And certainly there's no feedback that's come back to us that, don't we want, it's the reason why we're investing in a new website. We need to move on to what we can to improve that access, that web access, as much as possible. But there's not been the feedback that forms, for example, that everything, as far as possible, we understand is accessible regardless of what device you're using. So yeah, but we'll keep an eye on it.
Thank you very much. Did you? No. There's no other councillors wanting to ask any questions or comments. I I think, again, like the previous item, I think we've given a lot of feedback on that. So I thank councillors for their input, and again, given Ed a long list I can see of comments to take away for it. So on this, again, the recommendation, it's recommended that Community Scrutiny Group review the action plan contained within the Customer Access Strategy 2022-25 and make any further suggestions to officers they feel appropriate. Can I have a show of hands just to confirm that we've met that requirement? Thank you very much. And just worth going on to the next item. For the work programme, we've got for the next meeting on the 19th of January, the establishment of a youth council, corporate enforcement policy, and again then the work programme, and the 16th of March 2023 carbon management plan, the environment policy, if it take it, if that's if we're still waiting.
That's sorry, Chair. That's a slightly different policy. So that's not so much around the waste. It's more around the environmental work that we do in Derek's communities team.
Right.
But just for your information, that you mentioned that we still are waiting for information about waste.
And then the work programme. So if there's any comments and questions, and I'm sure that the corporate overview group might put a few our way as well to try and fit on into these next two meetings. No, can I have a show of hands to agree those for the next two meetings, please? Brilliant. Thank you very much, councillors. And that's the conclusion of our tonight's agenda. Thank you very much, officers, for coming, and thank you very much, Ed.